Good afternoon and welcome to Cairo Street Unitarian Chapel. As a chapel and as a chapel members, we are here to promote a free and inquiring religion through the worship of God and the celebration of life, the service of humanity and respect for all creation, and the upholding of the liberal Christian tradition. We kindle this light to be for us the light of God that shone in Jesus, the light of hope that shines in every human soul, the light of truth that guides each loving, free and open mind. In our Academy service today, we honour the memory of William Broadbent, a past minister of this chapel whose influence and ministry went far beyond this chapel and into the world. The flowers today are in memory of Jim Morris. Our next service will be on the 3rd of October at 10:30 and will be led by Gary Hammond. Our first hymn is found in the Green Book 99, When Jesus Walked Upon the Earth. we have a time for prayer and reflection. We pause to be conscious of that which makes each of us unique. The colour of our eyes and hair and skin, our height and build, the face that is ours. Alone, the inner self that no one knows. Our heritage of genes and family, of culture and of faith, with which we build our own special lives. The abilities and disabilities that give us each our potential to grow and create as no one else can. The place where we live, the town or city, the village, coast or countryside, that helps us to make us who we are. Our interests and hobbies, our taste in music, books or fashion, our likes and dislikes, all the things that make us distinct. Let us each give thanks for who we are as individuals, each one unique as humankind, to which our individuality contributes to the whole. Let us respect and celebrate our own uniqueness and each other's too. Beauty is truth. Truth, beauty, that is all. Truth is unblemished and clean, like a snowdrop piercing the hard earth, or a slender branch or leaf, or a curlew's call across the dark moor. Truth arrests rottenness, announcing what is green and good. Freshly the air tingles with its purity. The spores of malice are cleansed. False words reveal their tarnished emptiness. The disfigured faces of ignorance crumble in shame. Truth comes in moment of quiet reflection, bringing shafts of light to our burdened minds. Truth can bring peace after heavy hurt and harm has drained the spirit. And somewhere in the midst of grief, it shines and sparkles with a deeper knowing. But these are the times we yearn for, when its boldness might blast a car space or shake the servile crowd, scour the hollow rhetoric, and justify and mercifully and humbly reassemble what is beautiful and true, the fragile pieces of decency and compassion to a fragmented world. Let us have a time of quiet meditation and prayer. We are thankful for the silence we have shared. May the love and friendship which lies between us now go with us into our living, giving comfort in our sorrows, delight in our joys, drawing life and vitality from our differences and our sharing. We will now listen to the Lord's Prayer in a sung version. I will shortly be giving the talk about the life and the works of William Broadbent. But before I do so, I'd just like to recap a little bit more about this chapel and its origins. As we look around the interior of this chapel, and as we then walk into the burial grounds, we become conscious of the importance of this building to Unitarianism and to the history of Warrington. The successive congregations of this chapel have enjoyed the ministry of some outstanding ministers. And today we remember the life and work of one such minister, the Reverend William Broadbent. In 1945, the Reverend Tonkin, when preaching the anniversary service of Robert Yates, spoke of the values and the belief systems that Robert Yates held to. For our first minister set the tone of his successors. In 1646, Robert Yates came from Preston to become rector of St Elphin's Parish Church. In 1649, during the struggles on the organisation of religion in the context of the English Civil War, Yates, being a Presbyterian, found himself disagreeing with the parliamentary organisation on independent worship. He spoke out against it and refused to subscribe to the orders. For this objection, he was arrested and tried at Lancaster Castle, where he was convicted and sentenced to death. Determined not to retract his objections, it was whilst he was writing his last speech and testament that he was reprieved. Robert Yates returned to Warrington to continue as rector until in 1662, with the restoration of the Stuart monarchy, Anglican ministers of religion had to accept the Act of Uniformity to preach. Yates refused and was forced to leave the parish church. Ejected by the church, Yates and many of his congregation, against official approval and discrimination, founded their own chapel. Robert Yates was denounced later under the 5 Mile Act of preaching and sent to prison once again. Members of this congregation were also sent to prison or fined for not attending services of the Anglican tradition or of attending their own services where 5 or more were present. Life was not easy for those who held to their own beliefs. The charter, signed by Charles II in 1672 and held still today in this chapel, eventually allowed the congregation to worship freely. Is it any wonder then that throughout its history, members of this congregation have fought against injustice, inequality, and the rights of all people, irrespective of race, religion, or gender? To be allowed to lead their own lives freely. Researching the life of William Broadbent has been extremely interesting because, as you will realise as I'm reading his life, his friendship with the Gaskell family and his research, his scholarship have had a great influence on this chapel, and not only this chapel but many other Unitarian congregations in the northwest of England. William Broadbent, minister of Cairo Street Presbyterian Chapel, later to be known as Cairo Street Unitarian Chapel, is one of the most influential ministers of the chapel. For it was he who witnessed the chapel through its final changes of doctrine and theology from English Presbyterianism to becoming Unitarian. His friendship with so many learned theologians of his day put him at the centre of the theological and doctrinal debate of his age. His ministry at the chapel followed the ministries of Charles Owen, whose long stewardship saw the rebuilding of the enlarged chapel in 1745. A large congregational membership, and the establishment of the Warrington Dissenting Academy. The Reverend John Seddon followed, and he was both the minister from 1747 to 1770 and principal tutor of the Warrington Dissenting Academy. John Seddon was probably the first minister in Lancashire to teach the mere humanity of Jesus. The tutors of the academy, too, were a catalyst of change in the chapel, including the Reverend John Aitken, formerly a tutor at Daventry Dissenting Academy, and Joseph Priestley, who was ordained a minister in this very chapel. Priestley was an Arian in his early years before becoming a Socinian, and was to have a profound influence on the development of English Unitarianism, and also, along with his colleagues in the Academy, on the cultural life of Warrington and the theological development within the membership of the chapel. It often said that the changes to the chapel becoming Unitarian were provided by the teachings of John Seton and completed by the more pronounced views of the Reverend William Enfield. He was minister of the chapel from 1770 to 1785, when the congregation was in excess of 750 members. William Enfield was himself succeeded by the Reverend Joseph Beeley. He was the son of a prominent family of dyers and bleachers from Radcliffe, who came from Cockeybeck Chapel, otherwise known as Ainsworth Chapel, in 1791. He later returned to Cockeybeck Chapel. There is a memorial plaque there dedicated to his memory. It reads, "Pastor of the chapel for 26 years until his death on the 9th of August 1813, and states that he openly announced his Unitarianism on Sunday the 4th of April 1813 from the pulpit. Until then, to announce that you were a Unitarian was illegal. But he did so, knowing that on the 21st of July 1813, the Unitarian Toleration Act was receiving royal assent. When minister of Cairo Street Chapel, Joseph Beeley had established Warrington's first Sunday school. And it was with the intention to educate working children, and was to develop their mind and to develop their awareness of the world. The book Early Warrington Nonconformity, written by Arthur Mountfield and published in 1923, has a complete chapter on the Sunday school. The chapter spends time explaining the rules pupils have to adhere to attend. It gives details of the purchase of reading books, teaching books and equipment, the payments that the teachers employed enjoyed, the subjects they would teach, and the fees that would be paid. The minutes of the transactions relating to the institution for the charitable instruction of poor children established in the year 1788 are recorded. I will include some of their names because it is of interest who they were. They read that on the 10th of February 1788, Mr. Bent, Mr. S. Gaskell, Mr. Thomas Turner, Mr. Hart, Mr. Isaac Turner and Mr. J. Beeley were deputed by the subscribers at large to manage the institution for a month and to order all money and matters that may be necessary in order to have a proper establishment of that period. The names are given of the subscribers. They were members of the congregation, and they were paying themselves for the establishment of this school. They include Mr. William Ayres, who was the proprietor of Ayres Press, which continued to publish and print Unitarian publications for many years. The school was short-lived, no doubt to the high cost of running the school, and because it relied on voluntary subscriptions. But it demonstrates the aspirations of the congregation prior to the appointment of William Broadbent. The colleagues of William Broadbent and the friendships he enjoyed demonstrate that Sankey Street Chapel was able to appoint as its minister a man of proven academic and ministerial ability. He was educated for the ministry at Daventry Academy in Northamptonshire. He was educated under Thomas Robbins and Thomas Belsham. Belsham was to have a great influence on William's theological thought and development. Belsham had adopted Unitarian principles and had to resign as a tutor, and he then joined John Priestley at New College, Hackney. He was, however, a great influential Unitarian, and in 1805 he accepted the call to Essex Street Chapel, which, as you know, is still the headquarters of the Unitarian Church. His writings influenced early Unitarians, including William Broadbent, and included for William Broadbent on the writings that he did of the Gospels and his research into Genesis. Like Priestley, he dismissed the virgin birth, and in 1812 he published the memoirs of Theophilus Lindsay, one of the first Unitarian ministers, and included a chapter titled American Unitarianism. He argued that many American clergy entertained Unitarian views. This caused a great controversy in the United States between the liberal and the scriptural-based ministers, and it produced eventually a permanent schism between the New England Congregational churches, for many of the Congregational churches became avowedly Unitarian, whilst others remained Congregational. One reason why, when you see many of the old wooden clapboard New England churches, they are in fact now Unitarian. William Broadbent became not only a student of Belsham, but also a colleague. And he was appointed tutor at Daventry Academy in mathematics, natural philosophy, and logic. William Broadbent remained at the academy until 1792. For in January of that year, he took up his license as a dissenting Protestant minister and became minister of Cairo Street Presbyterian Chapel. He was obviously a wealthy man, for on his marriage he had ownership of the Hollies in Latchford, where he lived from his appointment in 1792, and the Hollies included 30 acres of land, staff quarters for household servants, and the employment of a coachman and a gardener, surely all demonstrating that he was a man of wealth. The appointment of William Broadbent is interesting on many accounts, not only doctrinal, because obviously the congregation knew of his views, but also of his involvement with the Gaskell family. The Gaskell family were now prominent members of the chapel congregation. Samuel held the position of chapel warden, and both he and his brother Roger were chapel trustees. Samuel's son Roger was to marry 3 times. His first marriage was to Anne Biggin. In 1792, William Broadbent married Rebecca Biggin, Anne's sister, making William Broadbent and Roger Gaskell brother-in-laws. So when appointing him the minister, the Gaskell family and the congregation would have known of his strong Unitarian leanings. Links between the Gaskell family and the Broadbent family were continuing to develop and increase and to extend. In 1813, in the Lancashire Parish Records, there is a marriage recorded for William Broadbent, that was the Reverend William Broadbent's nephew, and Anne Gaskell. William Broadbent's occupation is listed as a clerk in the parish of Grappenhole, which at that time would have included Latchford. The witnesses are of interest because they too, Esther Mills and Roger Gaskell, were all Gaskells. For Roger, Richard and Esther were the children of Samuel's sister. Both families were to become principal landowners in Latchford. The ownership of two houses in particular in Latchford illustrates how deep this relationship was. The houses, Ashfield and the Hollies, were to be lived in by both members of the Broadbent and the Gaskell families. Ashfield, the home of William Broadbent, was left on his death to his nephew, William Broadbent, and Holbrook Gaskell, nephew and son-in-law of Samuel, and uncle, of course, of the Reverend William Gaskell and his siblings. The house has a further footnote in history as it became the home of Robert Gaskell, grandson of Samuel, nephew of Holbrook, and the son of William Gaskell. His mother, Margaret Dimmock, was living with him when her son, the Reverend William Gaskell, and her daughter-in-law, Elizabeth, stayed after the death of their young son, William. And it was while staying at Ashfield that Elizabeth commenced writing her first novel, Mary Barton. William Broadbent had founded the Latchford Tannery in 1828, and he lived at Ashfield at the time before moving to the Hollies. Robert Gaskell, too, had commercial interests in the Latchford Tannery. If we look at the life of William Broadbent, we've looked at him really in the context of his relationship with the Gaskell family and this chapel. For as a young man, William Broadbent's theological views were not predominantly Unitarian. But he was strongly influenced by the writings of Thomas Belsham, whose long-term friendship he retained, and the colleagues that he had, such as Joseph Priestley. It was due to these that he re-examined his theological convictions. And so, as I said earlier, the appointment of William Broadbent was a man that the congregation knew. They also knew he was a convinced Unitarian who had associated with those at the forefront of the development of English Unitarianism as a theology. As a minister, his sermons were Unitarian in theology, and they were published to a wider audience through the publications of Ayres Press, whose proprietor, William Ayres, was not only a member of this congregation, but a convinced Unitarian. William was to continue his ministry here for 30 years, latterly assisted by his son Thomas. William's ministry left a major impact on the chapel. He was one of the driving forces of Unitarianism in Lancashire and Cheshire. He was a driving force of Unitarianism with an evangelical fervour that the Presbyterian congregations were lacking. During the time of his ministry at Sankey Street, there was a change in other congregations through the ministries of Benjamin Rigby at Chowbent, William Lambert at Lancaster, James Hawkes at Duckingfield, John Holland at Bolton, John Edwards and William Shepherd at Gattaca, William Allard at Bury, William Stevenson at Dob Lane, Joseph Ramsbottom at Gorton, Theophilus Harris at Knutsford, George Winch at Monton, William Johns, minister at both Nantwich and Sale, and Samuel Parker at Stockport. All were like William Broadbent, graduates of either Daventry Academy or its successor academy, Northampton. Under their leadership, Unitarianism rapidly expanded through the previous Presbyterian congregations of Lancashire and Cheshire. William Broadbent was very much the leader of this movement. And in June 1818, he delivered a sermon at the Lancashire and Cheshire Provincial Assembly. In his sermon, he showed how evangelical he was in asserting the truth of their religious philosophy. In his address that he gave, he was concerned with stripping away the impurities as he saw it and the corruptions as he saw it of Christianity. His sermon, The Progress of Gentile Error in the Christian Church and the Separation Consequences of the Gentiles from the Jewish believers in the first ages, showed how he believed that the ritual of the Jewish faith and the influence of Plato in Christianity had removed the human Jesus from Christianity. His sermon was published, was widely available, and is still available online, and a copy is held in the chapel vestry. In the dedication to his address, he spoke to the reverend ministers of the Association of these two counties. Gentlemen, the discourse which you honoured with your approbation, I respectfully submit to your candid perusal. The general position I advance, I trust you will find to be substantially maintained. The continuation of Gentile errors is a thing easily accounted for on the principles of human nature, and as the measure of God, we cannot doubt that like natural and moral evil in the divine governance, it is answering purposes of wisdom and importance that we cannot at present clearly comprehend. But when it is accomplished, the purpose of God we cannot question. It will be carried and cleared away, nor can we doubt that the means are arranged and also in operation for its removal. And as God now acts by human agency, it becomes the important duty to all the serious friends of revelation who are convinced of the fact I have stated, and especially the ministers of Christ, to contribute their best endeavours for its removal. I know other way, nor so we effectively serve the cause of our reverend and beloved Master. He continued, it is obviously necessary to prevent the progress of infidelity and to prevent the holy doctrine of our great Master purified from those old alterations in its proper and full energies in the mind. He continued for many more pages, but what he was attempting to do was to show the human face and side of Jesus. The impact of this speech and his deliverance of it at the Lancashire and Cheshire Assembly was enormous. You may find it difficult to believe today. Many chapels and congregations across Lancashire and Cheshire became Unitarian, and thus began as well legal issues over property rights for many, many years, where congregations became Unitarian, but those who disagreed with the change then took them to court and claimed that they were still Presbyterian. Whilst the formal undertaking of this chapel becoming Unitarian is not clear, it certainly caused a great debate among the members of Cairo Street Chapel. A minority of members left in 1797 to form the Stepney Street Congregational Chapel. Included amongst those members were members of the Rylands family. However, the majority remained to form a Unitarian congregation. And it's interesting to note that in the school that had been established during the time of Beecham, one of the Gaskells had actually been the teacher of Unitarian theology in the school. William's later life was marred by the sudden death of his talented son, Thomas Biggin Broadbent. There's a picture of Thomas Broadbent Biggin over on this side there. He'd been educated at Glasgow College, where he obtained an MA, and at Manchester Academy. After graduating in 1813, he became a classical tutor at Hackney College and Academy. In 1816, he filled a ministerial vacancy in Westminster. In 1816, he returned to Warrington, where he was assistant minister to his father. He wrote and prepared for the press many articles and books, including portions on the 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Timothy 1, and 1 Titus. He also corresponded again with his father's colleague, Thomas Beecham. His pulpit powers were said to be remarkable, and after his death in 1817, he had a number of his sermons published posthumously. They were so successful and popular that they reached a second edition. The death of his son, suddenly by apoplexy, was a great loss in the life of William Broadbent. There's a letter here that I've written out of how he expresses his great support to the great help and comfort that he had from the neighbourhood, and how at the funeral service which was held in this chapel, the chapel was crowded beyond whatever he had ever seen on any occasion before, and how the sermon had been impressive and produced a great effect. Thomas Beecham, one of the greatest Unitarians of his day, shared too at the loss of his son, Thomas Biggin Broadbent, and what a loss he was to this chapel and the congregation. After the death of his son, William Broadbent suffered broken health and depression. He resigned as a minister of this chapel in 1822, and he died at the Hollies in 1827, and is buried in the chapel ground with both his two wives. We will never know what influence his son would have had on the life of this chapel. I think it would have actually been quite a good one. For like his father, he would have fostered the growth and development of Unitarianism, not only in Warrington, but wider afield. Talking to people about the Broadbent family, it was interesting that they had memories of the three Broadbent sisters. His great-nephew Charles, the son of his nephew William, Charles William Broadbent, owned Latchford Tannery and established White Cross Wire Company. He became a Liberal councillor and was later mayor of Warrington in 1870. His daughter, Constance, became in December 1918 the first female Warrington councillor. And the three sisters lived together until their deaths. Looking back at the tithe map of Latchford in 1836, it's interesting how the connections with members of this congregation and the Broadbents were overrun. For the names of landowners in the tithe map for Latchford at that time includes Samuel Gaskell, Esquire, Josiah Lee, the Reverend William Broadbent, Hatton Turner, and Thomas Harrison, all associated with this chapel. Possibly we've not known as much of Thomas Broadbent as we have of other ministers, and I'm sure there's a great deal more we could find out about. But certainly he left a great influence on the religious theology of this chapel and of other congregations in the northwest of England. Thank you for listening. I chose for my first hymn When Jesus Walked Upon the Earth. The reason being so, it was because William Broadbent wanted to demystify Jesus and to accept Jesus as a human being. Our second hymn today is taken from the Green Book, hymn number 35, and is The Living God.
Down the
we have kindled the sacred fire, as we have gathered in community, mindful of the brave souls and the questioning, independent minds whose courage won our freedom. Amen. May the power and the mystery go before you, to show you the way, to shine upon you, to lighten your world, lie beneath you, to bear you up, walk with you, and give you companionship, and glow and flow within you, to bring you joy. Amen.